Welcome back to Southern Life. Today we're going to be in the Tampa Bay area. We're going to be in cities like Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Clearwater, as well as adjacent Manatee County, to understand what's going on in the Tampa Bay area. For the most part, the beaches right now are empty, and most of the travel that I'm seeing isn't tourist related, but just regular family business. There's news of corporations giving people massive layoffs, and of course, airport traffic is at a minimum. We can say that things are not looking good for Tampa right now. The economy is depressed, and as you're driving through the city, the most obvious thing is how empty everything feels, almost reminiscent of the COVID era. We'll start off in Manatee County, heading into Tampa from the south. The once rural community of Parrish is now the largest agglomerate of new home construction in the entire metropolitan area. People from Bradenton, Sarasota, and St. Petersburg are driven here for affordability. Considering the current condition of Florida's real estate market, it really seems absurd that there's this much construction going on. Construction here continues at a rapid pace. I did some videos in this area about a month or two ago, and already while driving through here, I couldn't recognize the area. Any piece of land that can be developed out here is being developed, and this area has transformed rapidly. I picked up a passenger here on rideshare that was going to the Tampa airport, flying back to Chicago, and the guy wouldn't shut up about how much he likes Donald Trump. I discreetly tried telling him that I wasn't interested in politics, and he continued pushing the subject throughout the entire hour-long ride. Eventually, I became even more vocal about how I would talk about anything except politics, and the person continued talking about politics. We went from please take a clue to please don't talk about this, and the guy just simply wouldn't shut up. Forced to take a listening ear since we're stuck in the same car and he wouldn't shut up, I started to reason with him on some of the views he had. For example, he mentioned that Chicago was the most dangerous city in the United States. I asked him to look up analytics on that, and it turns out that Chicago is less than average for the area. Surrounding cities like Cincinnati, Cleveland, St. Louis all have higher homicide rates. Persistently preaching and soliciting his personal views when they were not in demand, the individual also had absolutely no factual information to back up any of the things he was trying to convince me that I should believe in. And when we started fact-checking everything he said, just nothing checked out. Everything was based off of social media rhetoric, and none of it was based off of real-life information. And keep in mind that I asked this person several times to please let the conversation go, and he simply wouldn't shut up. This has to be the absolute worst type of Uber passenger you can get. The ones that you tell them you're not interested in a conversation, and then they go on endlessly about the conversation to the point that you have to engage their conversation because of the absurdity of the things they're saying, none of which actually factually can be confirmed. Everything complete social media rhetoric. This is the type of stupidity you get down here in Florida. These are individuals who move here from New York City or Chicago with law enforcement type retirements and pensions that they would have never got if they had lived here in Florida. I hate to generalize, but this is your typical passenger here in Parrish. It's a guy from Philly, Chicago, or New York City who retired on a massive pension from some law enforcement agency and then comes to Florida to try to convince me about how those cities are bad when he has a pension from those cities that got him living nice in the suburbs. And like I said, I hate making generalizations, but this is typically your passenger that you get up here. Somebody who's extraordinarily vocal about politics, and when you ask them to shut up and you're not interested, they continue ranting about it. A nice guy, good conversation, gave me a $15 tip. But it's difficult to deal with these types of individuals you meet up here when you kindly, repetitively ask them that you're not interested in talking about politics and they want to shove politics down your throat for an entire hour ride. At least the conversation made the hour-long ride go by fairly quickly since we were both at each other's necks. Him about politics and me asking him to please shut up. How are you going to retire in Florida with a law enforcement pension from another state and then sit here and tell me how horrible that state is? I don't see law enforcement officers in Florida getting any type of pensions. In fact, on today's ride, I had another passenger later on in the day who detailed to me the horrible things that are happening here with people in this metropolitan area when it comes to jobs. We're talking about layoffs. Now, this is over in Pinellas County. To get to Pinellas County, we got to cross the Skyway Bridge. This is the toll plaza across that bridge. The car in front of us, that little Chevy right there, they paid my toll. Act of kindness. I didn't pass it on to the person behind me. I kept it because I was going, and had to get to Tampa Airport, so I didn't think about it. But regardless, a nice act of kindness, a rare thing to be seen in this part of the world. I remember when I lived in Alabama, I would see this happen all the time. You're at a drive-thru and somebody would pay for your meal. But feeling thankful for this random act of kindness, I didn't have to pay the toll to go into the Tampa area. Ahead of us is the majestic Skyway Bridge. You'll notice that there is some construction work going on in the bridge. I believe the clearance underneath this bridge is about 200 feet. If you are fortunate, one day you'll be on this bridge with a boat narrowly going underneath you. It's happened to me once and it's an incredible experience. You'll notice that there is construction equipment and cranes right there on the other side of the bridge. So now we're in Pinellas County, the St. Petersburg area. We head to the beaches here and we discover that they seem emptier than I've ever seen them. Despite the fact that the tourist season has already begun with the snowbirds, the beaches are empty. The water is still warm enough for the locals to go for a swim, but there aren't too many locals here. We can say that for the most part, the coastline of St. Petersburg and Clearwater looks like a complete ghost town. From the Tampa airport, we brought people here to this area. They lived in a beautiful gated community. Unfortunately, my GoPro turned off and I wasn't able to get that footage, but it was a beautiful gated community. These were people from South America who were telling me that they're going to be selling their coastal home because of all the damages that they had during the hurricane. It's a lot of liability, and they want to move somewhere or invest somewhere where they feel that there's less liability from natural disaster. We crossed the bridge and now we are in Clearwater Beach. If you're interested in more about Clearwater Beach, look through my recent uploads. I just did a nice elaborate video. At around noon, I decided to take a nice break at the beaches and parks here, and I was able to get some really nice high quality footage of all these areas. So if you're more interested in Clearwater Beach, just look through my recent uploads and see that video. It was really a beautiful and gorgeous day. In the morning, the sun was out, the sky was blue, and the water was very clear. Later on in the day, it kind of became windy and overcast, and well, at least we enjoyed a beautiful morning on Clearwater Beach. But a morning devoid of tourists or anybody really. It seemed like other than a few people here or there, some homeless people, law enforcement, and Uber drivers, Clearwater Beach really does look like a ghost town. And there isn't really much per se hurricane damage that can be seen here other than the grass is dead in some places. It just seems like Clearwater Beach is going through a rough time. The locals that I talk to here give me mixed reviews. Some people tell me that things are better than they've ever been, but of course that doesn't check out with the reality of what's happening. It seems that people will put a spin on reality even when they know dang right things are bad. But business owners who care about their pocketbooks know things aren't doing good. Along the immediate coastline of Pinellas County, the amount of real estate available is jaw-dropping. Entire streets where like half the houses are vacant with for rent signs, for sale signs, or for lease signs. A lot of people here are leaving. They don't want the liability. This area hadn't got hit by a hurricane directly in something like 100 years. And in fact, many of the locals believe that there was a Native American woman that protected this area from hurricane impacts. So people here were just, again, completely blinded from reality. Reality hit them fairly quickly with 2 hurricanes back to back that obliterated this coastline. And now people are bailing out fairly quickly. Here in Florida, people seem to believe anything. Superstitions, politicians, they put their faith blindly in anything, even moving to places that clearly are not the best places to live in. Despite the fact all the signs are clear and obvious, people just seem completely blinded by their ideologies. Talking about ideologies, once you cross that bridge outside of Clearwater Beach, you're in downtown Clearwater. Now, Clearwater has a particular thing going on called Scientology. Now, I've tried reading up about these people and nothing seems conclusive. So rather than speculate, I'll just leave you with the facts. Scientology has bought up much of downtown Clearwater, and that means that most of downtown Clearwater looks something like a ghost town. Sure, Clearwater Beach is colorful and lively, but when you cross this bridge into downtown Clearwater, things definitely take an emotional slump. It's referred to some people as a cult. Now, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but the point being is that these people own a large percentage of downtown Clearwater, And it's definitely depressive as far as vibe and ambiance, because most cities in Florida have very lively downtowns, but that isn't the case of Clearwater. Their downtown is depressed, and well, it seems fairly boring and sad, with mostly just vacant real estate for their purposes. Seems like almost every time I make a video about Clearwater, the comment section is just flooded with people who say they live here and they wish they had a downtown like Tampa or a downtown like Sarasota, but they don't. Downtown Clearwater practically is just one vacant area, and at least you have downtown Clearwater Beach nearby if you want to see something a little bit more lively. Clearwater is a beautiful city. It's got charming neighborhoods, but as of today, when you enter the major boulevards of this city like Gulf to Bay, you could look down the road for miles before you see a vehicle, and this is on a weekday. Now on my channel, I've had the accusation on all these videos that I'm recording on Sundays. The issue is I'm uploading videos every single day, and well, there's only one single Sunday. It's impossible for me to be in Orlando, Miami, Fort Myers, and Clearwater all in the same day. There isn't enough daylight for that. But again, it's the same story. People that are completely blinded to reality, like the economical situation in Florida. Now, I'm not going to mention the name of this corporation, but they are located in Pinellas County, and they are recently about to lay off an absurd amount of employees. Allegedly, the rumor is that they're laying off the people that are about to receive pensions or retirements from this corporation. These are people who slaved their entire careers off for this corporation, and now this corporation is going to lay them off so that they don't have to give them any retirement benefits. That's just the rumor that people are telling me on the streets of Pinellas County, and a lot of people that I pick up here in Pinellas County are telling me about this situation. Basically, it's one of the Fortune 500 companies. They have given their CEO a massive bonus, a bonus that would have probably been enough to keep all the employees that are losing their jobs, but they're going after the people who have worked their entire lives, their entire careers, all that devoted to this single corporation, and right before they get to the point where they're about to receive their retirements and benefits, any pensions, whatever they've earned working for this company, they're now being laid off on a massive scale and replaced with younger people who will eventually probably face the same fate. So this is what I tell people from New York who move to Florida with their pensions and retirements from New York City and law enforcement jobs up north, and then they want to come down here in Florida and talk bad about those cities. If you had been here in Florida during that whole time, you wouldn't be getting a pension, you'd be getting a layoff. At the southern tip of Pinellas County is the beautiful city of St. Petersburg, much safer than many of the other large cities in the United States. This city has water all the way around, which is a liability, but it's also enjoyable. Now, St. Petersburg shares proximity to Tampa Airport, and it's a very practical place to live. Unfortunately, it's also fairly expensive. That's why everybody's moving out there to perish. So back at the Tampa Airport, we've talked about how the Uber lot gets so filled up that eventually Uber actually closes access to their drivers to the airport lot. So if you bring somebody to the Tampa Airport, you get prompted to leave the airport immediately. Uber kind of blocks your account until you leave the airport area. So that is because there's so many Uber drivers waiting for rides. And it's really sad to see that Tampa, despite being a large city with so many great things going on, lots of large events, lots of business. I mean, Tampa is an important city after all, but the economy here just can't support all the people that are here. People moved here, but industries weren't created, didn't exist. And those industries that do exist, as you can see, are fairly cutthroat, and instead of looking out to make sure that they can create opportunities for people, they're trying to see what they can deprive people from. Tampa and St. Petersburg both enjoy fairly good infrastructure for being in the state of Florida. Access to coastlines, expressways, ports. These cities have a lot more going on than other places in Florida. The issue is that has also created a price appreciation where the cost of living makes incomes look impossible. And that's really the problem that many of the young people are having living in this metropolitan area. And of course, you're talking about a state that is what they call a right to work state. What it really means is that you have no rights as an employee here. Corporations can do what they wish with their employees. There aren't unions or any type of protections here for anybody. So if you have a job in Florida, you're really at the mercy of whoever's hiring you, and they can let you go as they wish. They don't need to offer any explanations, and it doesn't matter how dirty they treat you. The moment you get fired, you have to leave, and all your rights are lost. It's a state that really protects the big corporations at the expense of the regular working class people. And this is what continues to push people across that Skyway Bridge back into Manatee County, where properties are more affordable. Despite the commute, a weird one at that, it's only 35 minutes when the bridge is open. If there's high winds, it's close. If there's an accident, it can close. That means that your 30-minute commute could become a 2.5-hour commute if something happens along this route, and it happens quite often. Thankfully, it's only happened to me once, where my 35-minute commute back home turned into a 2-hour and 45-minute drive through Tampa traffic during rush hour. But despite that, this Skyway Bridge continues to be the only path connecting the southern tip of Pinellas County with Manatee County. And it's really a blessing that this infrastructure exists here, because without it, many people's lives simply wouldn't be able to exist. There's been talk about creating another bridge connecting Anna Maria Island to St. Petersburg Beach. That would be incredible, but most likely unrealistic, especially in the state of Florida, where infrastructure projects like this cost a lot of money, and the state doesn't seem to care too much about infrastructure. Manatee County would definitely be interested in something of this sort, because the economic impact of connecting Manatee County's coastline to Pinellas County coastline would be an incredible one. Economically, the impact would be tremendous, because all of the tourists that visit Pinellas County would now be able to spend money in Manatee County. So it's a situation that St. Petersburg, Pinellas County wouldn't want, because it would steal business from them, but Manatee County would benefit from greatly. Also, the northern tip of Anna Maria Island, which is off the screen to the right of us, that's the mouth of Tampa Bay. That little island, it's all rich people, and they definitely don't want all this traffic going through their little tiny island. So it seems like the interests of a lot of people will get in the way of that. But it would make sense in the long term if that bridge did exist at the mouth of Tampa Bay to connect all these islands and bring together all of these tourist communities. And of course, to alleviate traffic overall for people who otherwise have to make quite the commute. Initially the new home construction thing was going on down there in South Florida, and they have very strict building codes. But as you move into these other counties like Manatee and Polk County, their building codes aren't as strict, and these areas are significantly more vulnerable to hurricane aftermaths. And I think what's been happening in Florida with growth along Polk County, for example, on the eastern outskirts of Tampa, is that these are areas that really don't have a lot of building codes. Hillsborough County is one of those counties that doesn't have the strongest building code. So developers can build houses cheaply with very little hurricane tolerance. And in the case of a hurricane hitting this metropolitan area directly, the impacts are, of course, a lot of liability. Now, thankfully, the last hurricanes didn't hit the Tampa Bay directly. They made landfall in other parts of the state, but they affected this area tremendously. And that just goes to show that the day a hurricane actually hits the Tampa Bay area, a storm surge like the one that hit Fort Myers actually hits Tampa, or a hurricane like the one that hit Jamaica, right? Jamaica had never had hurricanes like that, and they just had a Category 5. In Jamaica, if you look at the aftermath videos, you'll see that many of the newer constructions there were built like the American style, out of sticks. That's not how you build houses in the Caribbean. Houses in the Caribbean have to be out of concrete and rebar, even the roofs and the ceilings. But because of wanting to build fast and grow fast, and everybody wanting to have a bougie suburban looking house in Jamaica, now they get hit by a Category 5, and all those people that were trying to speculate now are practically homeless. And the people that had a nice little house out of concrete, they might have to clean up the yard, but their homes are still there. And this is really the problem with Florida. There's been a lot of new home construction, particularly in the central part of the state, in counties that don't have very strict building codes. So the impending disaster is still possible, and a lot of people ignore that when all the growth was going on. But now that they've seen a small taste of a hurricane, they're realizing that it really isn't worth it. When you look at real estate prices along the Gulf Coast, it really isn't that high. Florida really is the exception, probably because of its warmer weather and nicer beaches. Florida was able to distinguish itself from states like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. Their beaches simply cannot compete. But economically, the Gulf Coast is starting to become something like a rust belt, and these cities really aren't going anywhere. A while back, people were using terms like the Sun Belt. You don't hear that term anymore. Now what you hear about are foreclosures and real estate bubbles that are bursting. The Tampa area has a diverse amount of communities, and there wouldn't be enough time on today's video to cover all the communities that exist here. But as of right now, today's video should give you a pretty good idea of what's going on in the area, particularly along the coastal areas. People are starting to appreciate a little bit more the aftermath of hurricanes and the implications economically of owning real estate in areas where liabilities are high. And despite the natural beauty of these places, most people are probably going to visit here versus live in these high-risk areas. That's what's going on in the Tampa Bay area as we move into the end of 2025. November's around the corner, but the snowbirds don't seem to be anywhere around.